Imagine the scene. The air is damp. It's heavy with the scent of salt and cold stone.
Right.
We are not standing on a battlefield with banners waving in the wind. We aren't in a pristine dojo with polished wooden floors. We're in a cave.
The Spirit Rock Cave.
Exactly. Inside sits a man. He is at the very end of his journey, and honestly, given the life he's led, he probably looks incredibly weathered. I mean, he is arguably the greatest duelist who ever lived.
A man who survived countless life or death encounters,
Yeah.
starting from when he was literally just a child.
Yeah. But now, the sword is sheathed, he's alone, he feels his mortality approaching. It's like this physical weight on his chest.
He's cast aside his possessions.
He takes up a brush, and the thing is, he isn't writing to boast about his victories. He isn't writing a memoir to, clear his name or settle scores.
No, he's trying to do something much, much harder.
He is trying to distill an entire lifetime of survival, of high-level strategy, of bloodshed, into something tangible, something useful. He is basically drawing a map for the ones who come after him.
It is such a powerful image. And it really sets the tone for everything we are about to explore. This is Miyamoto Musashi at the culmination of his life. And what's striking, but really caught my attention in the source material, is that he starts this final work, the Book of Five Rings, with the Earth Scroll.
Right.
He doesn't start with how to strike or, the psychology of the void or how to move like water. He starts with the ground.
If this episode helps you, please hit like and subscribe for the next one.
So if we look at this metaphor of Earth,
Mm-hmm.
why did he choose that specific element to begin?
I was actually thinking about this. When most people think of strategy or, martial arts, especially in movies, they think of the action, they think of the clash, the fire.
Absolutely. The excitement.
Right. But Earth implies something static. It implies dirt. It feels sort of slow. It feels like the boring part, honestly.
It does. But it also implies support. Think of it as the terrain in any strategic endeavor, whether it is a severe conflict, a business negotiation, or just managing your own life. There is a landscape you have to navigate.
You need a place to stand.
Exactly. Musashi is telling us that the Earth represents the doctrine. It is the structure. You cannot be fluid like water if you have nowhere to stand. You cannot be decisive like fire if you don't have fuel. It's the Earth Scroll, the science of stability.
He actually uses a really specific phrase for this, doesn't he? A straight road mapped out on the ground.
He does. He literally writes that strategy is a straight road.
Which is interesting because, strategy usually implies deception, flanking, surprise. But he's saying the ultimate strategy is straight.
That is the critical distinction. We tend to think of strategy as this complex, multi-dimensional chess game where you are constantly tricking your opponent with smoke and mirror.
Outsmarting them.
But Musashi says, no. The true way is a straight road. It is visible. It is completely accessible to anyone willing to study it thoroughly. It is not about hiding. It is about walking a path that is so structurally sound that you simply cannot be shaken from it.
It's just geometry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line.
But in real life, we kind of love the detours. We love the hacks. We love these shortcuts that usually just end up being long cuts.
We want the secret tunnel, not the straight road.
Yeah. And that is exactly what the Earth Scroll is fighting against. It is this anti-hack manifesto. Musashi warns us that if you deviate even slightly at the beginning, the result is an absolute disaster.
Which brings up this fascinating concept he introduces, the macro and the micro. He insists you have to know the smallest and biggest things simultaneously.
This part really stood out to me in the text. He talks about the physics of groups versus individuals. He says you cannot reverse the direction of a large group quickly, but an individual is incredibly hard to predict.
Right. It is all about momentum and inertia. Imagine a massive ship, or in his context, a large army moving across a field. Once it is moving in one direction, it takes a massive amount of energy to turn it.
It has mass.
Yes, and because of that mass, it is actually easy to predict where it is going. The physics dictate the path. But a single person.
An individual is twitchy.
Exactly. Their mind changes in an instant. They are remarkably hard to predict. Musashi is teaching us to profoundly understand the nature of the material we are working with.
So if you are dealing with a large organization, you treat it like a big ship. You don't expect it to pivot on a dime. But if you are dealing with a single person, say in a negotiation, you have to be completely ready for sudden, irrational shifts.
And this applies to yourself, too. This is where he talks about the immense danger of the little bit of crookedness. He argues that if there's a little crookedness in the spirit at the start, at the foundational Earth level, it leads to a major divergence later.
It is basic navigation theory. If you are off by 1 single degree when you leave port in Lisbon, you don't end up in New York. You miss the entire continent. You end up in, I don't know, Greenland.
Or the middle of the ocean. That is the essence of the Earth scroll. It requires radical integrity in the foundation.
Radical integrity. I like that.
If your foundation is even slightly cracked, the skyscraper falls down. It genuinely doesn't matter how beautiful the windows are on the top floor. And to explain this, Musashi uses a metaphor that I honestly didn't expect from a samurai of his status.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
I expected him to talk about tigers or dragons or towering mountains. Instead, he compares the warrior to a carpenter.
Yes,
Oh,
the
yeah.
carpenter metaphor. I actually laughed when I got to this section because it felt so blue collar. Here is this elite sword saint, this truly terrifying historical figure, and he is talking about wood grain and tools and floor plans. It felt like watching a home renovation show.
It just shows his intense practicality. He didn't see himself as a mystical wizard. He saw himself as a craftsman. He spends a very significant portion of the Earth Scroll detailing the exact role of the foreman carpenter.
And we really need to unpack this because it is arguably the best leadership advice in the entire text.
Let's do it. He starts with the master plan. The foreman has to have a master plan for the house.
Right, you don't just start nailing boards together and hope it miraculously turns into a temple.
You need to know the exact dimensions, the layout, the intended function. Musashi says the strategist needs a concrete plan for the campaign, or for life, in the exact same way, but then he gets deeply into the materials.
This is the part that is so brilliant for anyone managing a team or even just managing their own personal energy.
The selection of the wood. He goes into weirdly specific detail here. He talks about how not all wood is the same, and how a bad carpenter simply throws crooked wood away, but a master carpenter uses absolutely everything.
Let's break down the categories he lists. First, you have straight, unknotted timber.
That is your premium stuff. It is beautiful, it is perfectly straight, it is exceptionally strong.
And where does that go?
That goes to the revealed pillars, the stuff you actually see. The front porch, the main columns in the grand entry hall, it represents aesthetic and structural perfection.
So in a modern company, these are your face people. They are exceptionally reliable, they are polished, they present incredibly well to clients. You put them right out front.
Exactly. But then you have timber that is incredibly strong, but maybe it is gnarled, it has knots, it is twisted, it is, well, ugly. Do you throw it away?
No. Musashi says you use it for the hidden structural support. It is strong, maybe even stronger than the straight wood because of the dense knots, but it just isn't pretty, so you put it safely inside the walls.
This is such a profound management insight.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the gnarled timber in a modern workplace. These are the people who might be difficult. Maybe they are highly eccentric. Maybe they are terribly blunt in meetings.
But they are undeniably brilliant.
They are incredibly strong. A bad manager fires them because they don't visually fit the culture. A master carpenter, a true Musashi strategist, hides them in the back end, solving the hardest possible problems where no one has to look at them, but where their sheer strength holds up the entire roof.
That is such a great way to look at it. You don't force the gnarled wood to be a front porch column. That would just look bad and make everyone uncomfortable. But you also don't use the straight, pretty wood to hold up the dark, damp cellar, because that is a tragic waste of beauty.
Precise. And then finally you have the weak timber, the stuff that is knotted and soft and just technically bad wood.
And even this, he insists, has a use. Scaffolding.
Scaffolding or firewood. Or things that are meant to be strictly temporary. You use that wood for tasks that aren't structural at all, things that heavily support the process but absolutely won't cause the house to collapse if they fail.
Musashi is basically saying that a master carpenter uses everything. He doesn't waste material. He just puts it in the exact right place.
Right. And translating this to our own lives, because obviously not all of us are managers running massive teams. This is fundamentally about the resource allocation of our own personal skills.
Exactly. I might be gnarled timber when it comes to organizing spreadsheets. I can do it, but it is ugly. It takes forever, and I absolutely hate it. But I might be straight timber when it comes to speaking directly to clients.
So don't build your house, your career on a foundation where you have to build complex spreadsheets in public constantly. That is just bad carpentry. Build the house so your genuine strengths are the visible pillars and your weaknesses are just the temporary scaffolding you use to get the job
Do
done.
not make your weaknesses load-bearing. I love that. And then, once you finally have the wood sorted out, comes the
The
tools.
carpenter sharpens his own
I
tools.
feel like this is a direct call-out. It honestly felt intensely personal when I read it.
It should. Musashi is incredibly clear here. A dull tool is a direct failure of character. It isn't a mere accident. It means you are lazy. It means you fundamentally do not respect the craft.
Back in his era, that meant your saw, your plane, your chisel. If you show up to the job site and you have to struggle to merely cut a board because your saw is rusted dull, you are dragging down the whole team.
But today, we don't really carry chisels. So what is the dull tool in our modern era?
It is your environment. It is your tech stack. If you are a designer and your software crashes every single time you open a large file, that is a horribly dull tool.
If you are a writer and you haven't read a challenging book in ages, your vocabulary is completely dull.
I would absolutely add physical health to that list. If your back constantly hurts because you sit in a terrible chair, or your brain is completely foggy because you barely sleep, you are essentially trying to frame a massive house with a broken hammer.
Exactly. And Musashi says the carpenter spends effort constantly maintaining the tools. It is not something you do rarely. You don't just upgrade your software and then completely forget about it. You maintain the entire system.
If you're a programmer, your deep knowledge of the syntax is your tool. If that gets rusty, your code gets sloppy.
It is that critical separation of doing the work versus preparing to work. I think we get so obsessed with the doing because that visibly feels productive. Sharpening the saw just feels like waiting.
But if you don't wait to sharpen, the work takes twice as long and looks half as good.
Musashi vehemently demands that deep respect for the equipment. And this leads perfectly to his severe warning about what happens when you prioritize the completely wrong things. He calls it hastening the bloom of the flower.
Hastening the bloom. That sounds very poetic, but he definitely means it as an insult, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. It is a harsh critique of superficiality.
Mm-hmm.
Hastening the bloom means frantically trying to look impressive before you are actually effective. It is the ultimate form of style over substance.
The flower is the visual display. The nut is the actual fruit, the deep substance.
Right. In carpentry, this would be a builder who spends endless effort carving a beautiful, intricate dragon into a pillar, but the pillar itself is resting on soft mud. Or using fancy, complicated joinery that looks incredibly cool visually, but simply snaps under the actual weight of the roof.
Musashi completely hates this.
He despises it because it is fake.
And because it is genuinely dangerous. In a real duel, if you use a flashy theatrical move that leaves your guard open, you literally die.
Yeah.
In construction, the house completely collapses.
He insists you must not use showy shortcuts. The work must not be warped. The joints must perfectly align.
The joints must align. That is such a beautifully simple standard. It is strictly binary. Either they align flush or they don't. You simply can't fake a flush joint.
And that brings us perfectly to the next big section, the standard and the method. If we aren't frantically chasing flowers, if we aren't chasing external validation or applause, how do we actually know if we are getting better?
How do you know if the joints are actually aligning?
Musashi gives us a remarkably simple definition of good. He says the work is truly planed, it meets well, it is not merely finished in random sections just to look good on the surface.
It is about radical, uncomfortable honesty. You internally know when you've done a job halfway. You absolutely know when you've just swept the dust under the rug and hope no one noticed.
Musashi says the Earth Scroll bluntly demands that you look at the complex spreadsheet, look at the difficult email, look at the sprawling project, and ask, is this actually true? Does it fit? Or am I just forcing it? Am I hiding a massive structural gap with cheap putty?
And to realistically get to that incredibly high level of quality where you simply don't need the putty, he talks extensively about the practice loop.
But he says something highly interesting about the core purpose of practice. We usually think practice is just about getting faster or physically stronger. He says its primary purpose is to remove confusion.
Yes, confusion or hesitation or doubt. That is the true enemy.
Think about a highly high-stakes situation, maybe a crucial presentation to an executive board. If you have to suddenly stop and desperately think, wait, what is the core point of this slide? Or how do I rationally explain this specific data? You are completely disconnected. There is a massive gap between your pure intent and your physical action.
And in that tiny gap, you entirely lose the room. Or in his world, in a sword fight, you lose your life.
Correct. Thorough practice is precisely meant to close that dangerous gap. You relentlessly train until the incredibly difficult becomes ordinary. You make the difficult an ordinary affair.
I truly love that. The goal isn't to look like a wildly straining superhero. The goal is to make the highly advanced superhero stuff feel exactly like effortlessly folding the laundry.
Precisely. You desperately want to reach a state where, as he perfectly puts it, the body does not drag the mind, and the mind does not pull the body. They move together flawlessly.
And the actual way you get there is decidedly not through frantic, crazy, exhausting bursts of intense energy. It's calm repetition over intensity.
This is a huge, vital distinction for our modern world. We are completely obsessed with intensity, high-intensity training, extreme boot camps, the whole crush-it culture.
We genuinely think if we aren't profusely sweating and actively screaming, we simply aren't working hard enough.
Musashi would likely just shake his head at that entire mindset. He values deep consistency, vastly over shallow intensity. He acknowledges that absolutely everything is difficult at first.
He uses the specific example of wielding a heavy halberd, right? Or drawing a very stiff bow.
Yes. At first, it feels entirely impossible. It heavily drags you down. Your muscles physically shake. But with steady use, the pull becomes significantly stronger, and the immense burden becomes remarkably lighter.
It is the profound idea that you don't need to loudly scream to lift the heavy weight. You just need to calmly lift it constantly until it genuinely feels like a light feather.
That is the pure Earth Scroll method. Calm, steady, utterly relentless. It is decidedly not about a flashy cinematic montage of sweating and grunting. It is about the quiet, unglamorous discipline of doing the exact same precise cut perfectly countless times.
It is incredibly boring.
And that is exactly why it works so well, because most normal people simply quit when it gets boring. The true strategist just quietly keeps cutting.
But discipline can definitely go wrong, can it? If you just blindly drill the exact same thing forever without thinking, you just become a rigid robot. Musashi thankfully gives us some very clear guardrails to prevent exactly that.
He certainly does, because discipline completely devoid of wisdom just becomes dangerous rigidity. And in a dynamic fight, rigidity is guaranteed death.
He has this incredibly stark warning. Fixation is the way to death. Fluidity is the way to life.
This is the central paradox of the Earth Scroll. You absolutely need the firm structure of the Earth, the unshakable foundation, but you must never, ever become a trapped prisoner of it.
If you become totally obsessed with only one single way of doing things, you are effectively dead.
This connects directly to his famous two swords concept. Musashi is historically famous for actively fighting with two swords, right?
Yes, the Nitin Ichiri school.
Most traditional samurai strictly fought with one single two-handed sword. Musashi deliberately fought with a long sword in one hand and a shorter sword in the other. But the deep point wasn't just some arrogant boast that two swords are visually cooler than one.
The point was pragmatically use absolutely everything you have available.
He emphatically says, do not have a special fondness for one tool.
Right. Too much is the exact same as not enough.
If you are blindly obsessed with your longsword, let's translate that to modern terms and say you're obsessed with big data analytics. You will struggle horribly in a narrow, chaotic hallway where you desperately need a short sword.
Where you need fast human intuition.
Exactly. And conversely, if you are entirely obsessed with only the short sword, you will fail miserably in a wide-open field against an opponent with a massive spear.
Yeah.
The necessary guardrail here is true confidence completely without ego.
Confidence completely without ego. That is a notoriously tough balance to strike.
The fragile ego loudly says, I am strictly a longsword expert. That is my core identity. I simply refuse to use short swords. True confidence quietly says, I am a versatile warrior. I will pragmatically use whatever specific tool effectively solves the immediate problem.
Musashi says it is a terrible tragedy to die with a weapon entirely undrawn.
That hits so hard.
It really does. Do not die with a weapon undrawn.
Think deeply about what that means. It means don't fail a critical mission just because you were far too proud to use a perfectly good resource that was sitting right there on your belt.
In a highly modern context, don't fail a massive team project because you were far too proud to simply ask the quiet expert sitting in the very next cubicle.
Or don't completely burn yourself out because you are too falsely proud to actually use your earned vacation days. Those things are your weapons. Actively use them.
He also lays out some very clear ethical guardrails, the 9 principles. We obviously won't list them all right here, but 2 really stood out as foundational for this specific scroll. First, do not think dishonestly. And next, do nothing, which is of no use.
Those are essentially the twin bookends of the entire Earth scroll. Total honesty is the bedrock foundation of the structure. And extreme efficiency, doing absolutely nothing of no use, is the elegant result of that stable structure.
If you are brutally honest about what you're actually doing, you naturally stop doing completely useless things.
Let's make this highly concrete. We promised 3 highly modern examples. We have thoroughly covered the deep theory, the thoughtful carpenter, the straight road, the sharp tools. Now let's practically apply the Earth scroll to work, to relationships, and to our personal habits.
Let's start with work, the professional realm.
Okay, so actively applying the strategy of the artisan to a highly modern job.
I want to go way beyond just the generic advice to work hard. Let's say I am a senior project manager. The crucial project is entirely on fire. Everyone is utterly panicking. How does the Earth Scroll actually help me in that specific moment?
First, you calmly check your timber. The fire is very often caused by carelessly putting the entirely wrong wood in the wrong place.
You mean putting the weak wood in a load-bearing spot?
Exactly. Maybe you have a very junior, inexperienced person desperately trying to hold up a massive, complex main pillar of the project. The true Earth Scroll manager doesn't just loudly yell, "Work harder," at everyone. They rationally reevaluate the material.
And they adjust the structure.
They might calmly say, okay, this specific person is definitely gnarled timber. They are stressing out horribly in this highly visible client-facing role. I'm going to quickly move them to the quiet back end to focus solely on solving the deeply technical bug that is actually causing the massive delay.
So it is a fundamental structural reassessment, completely devoid of panic.
Exactly. And then you immediately apply the core concept of the work is truly planed. You firmly stop the panic. You set a stark, clear standard.
How so?
You plainly say, we're decidedly not going to try to magically fix absolutely everything immediately. We're going to perfectly plane this one single board. We're going to permanently solve the critical login issue. That is it. You severely narrow the focus to something you can execute with absolute unshakable integrity.
And where does the consistent practice part fit in?
That critically happens long before the fire ever starts. The Earth Scroll Manager constantly runs structured drills. They thoroughly practice the emergency deployment process when things are perfectly calm.
They proactively sharpen the tools.
They sharpen the software, the vital communication protocols, the backup systems, so that when the massive fire inevitably comes, the buckets simply don't leak.
Okay, let's pivot and look at relationships, the partner or the friend. This honestly feels like a slightly weird fit for a brutal 17th century samurai text, but I really think the stability aspect applies perfectly.
It absolutely does apply. I think the key guiding concept here is stability and repair. Do you remember Musashi explicitly saying the mind shouldn't change between fighting and normal situations?
Yeah, that unshakable stability of spirit, determined though calm.
In deeply personal relationships, that translates to consistently maintaining a highly stable emotional tone. We so often let our raw emotions just whip us around violently. We are ecstatic, then we are furiously angry, that we are completely distant and cold.
That is extremely unstable ground.
Exactly. Your partner genuinely doesn't know where to safely stand. If the emotional earth under their feet keeps violently shaking, they simply can't build a secure life with you.
So the practical application is total consistency, being the solid earth for the other person.
Consistency. And crucially, developing the habit of repair. Think deeply about the master carpenter again. If a crucial joint comes loose, he doesn't throw a fit and burn the whole house down. He doesn't uselessly scream at the wood.
He just calmly fixes it. He realigns it.
That is such a great mental image. Realigning a struggling relationship. Being able to safely say, hey, we're definitely a little warped in our communication right now. Let's sit down and carefully plane it down until it fits perfectly again.
It creates a wonderful culture of deep safety.
If there's a painful disconnect, a bitter fight, a bad misunderstanding, you have a highly consistent, totally reliable method for fixing it completely without toxic blame. You simply say, okay, the structure is clearly a little wobbly, let's collaboratively shore it up. You treat the relationship exactly like a master craftsman thoroughly treats a prized building. It regularly needs careful maintenance, not dramatic explosions.
I genuinely love that approach. Finally, let's talk about our internal habits, the individual level.
This is entirely about friction removal, the core concept of the straight road.
So aggressively removing the daily obstacles.
Exactly. We so often recklessly clutter our own personal paths. We constantly put knotted timber right in the middle of our own day, Endless digital distractions, terrible messy routines, entirely useless scrolling.
So the direct application is to clearly identify that useless knotted timber and ruthlessly turn it into firewood.
Relegate it to the burn pile. Establish a rock-solid baseline routine that perfectly primes your working environment. If you want to successfully work out early, the true Earth Scroll approach isn't to rely heavily on raw willpower.
Because willpower is fire, and fire burns out quickly.
Exactly. The Earth approach is to carefully lay out your workout clothes in advance. You thoughtfully prep the physical terrain.
You deliberately make the straight road the absolute easiest possible road to walk.
Precisely. Steady, calm follow-through. You practically guarantee the next positive action is easy because the structural foundation is perfectly set.
Okay, I want everyone actively listening to us to actually do this right along with us. We have intentionally designed a guided exercise called the Earth Scroll Practice Plan. You can easily do this in your head right now or carefully write it down later. We are going to walk through it, step by step.
This is a highly direct, practical application of Musashi's core logic. We will flow through the steps.
First, choose one specific skill or life area to intently focus on. Just one single area. Do not try to rebuild the entire sprawling city. Just focus on one single house.
It could be your physical health, your professional writing, your relationship with a family member. Just clearly pick the specific terrain.
Next, precisely define the exact standard of success in exactly one sentence.
Remember the rule. The work is truly plain. What does good actually look like in strict reality? I run a specific distance consistently. I write exactly this many words. Make it strictly binary. Did you successfully do it or not? No vague. I will try my absolute best.
The joint perfectly fits or it completely doesn't. Then choose one specific tool or environment upgrade. This is the act of sharpening the saw.
Ask yourself, what is the one specific thing that is making your execution dull? Is it your terrible desk chair? Is it your chronic lack of sleep? Is it a highly distracting app on your phone? Fix the broken tool. Buy the better running shoes. Completely delete the app.
Next, choose one specific daily practice action.
Calm, steady repetition. What is the one small, specific thing you can do constantly that reliably makes the incredibly difficult feel totally ordinary? A short period of focus reading, a brief stretching routine.
Then, aggressively remove one specific distraction or friction point. This is the act of cutting the useless.
Merely identify the knotted timber that is constantly blocking your path. Throw it straight into the firewood pile. Permanently turn off the digital notifications. Physically move the junk food completely out of the house. Vigorously clear the road.
Next, deliberately choose one phrase that consistently keeps you mentally steady. A personal mantra for the centered mind.
It could easily be Musashi's own stark words. Do nothing which is of no use. Or simply, straight road. Just something that instantly snaps your focus back to the solid earth when you inevitably start to drift.
Finally, commit to one specific proof action to take immediately.
Not later. Not after you finish listening. Immediately. Lay the very first wooden plank. Irrefutably prove to yourself that the solid foundation is actually being actively built.
I deeply love that. It instantly takes it from lofty philosophy down to brutal reality. But, even with a perfect plan, people constantly mess this up. Let's thoroughly cover the common mistakes. We carefully identified exactly 5 of them directly based on the original text.
The first one is a massively common one. Over-specialization, being the classic one-trick pony.
This is the guy who only ever has a hammer, so absolutely every problem looks exactly like a nail.
Musashi explicitly says, become acquainted with every art. If you only know one single narrow way to creatively solve problems, you are incredibly fragile. If the terrain suddenly changes, you completely fall apart. The fix is to actively broaden your base. Learn to use all the tools.
The next mistake, neglecting the trifles.
The tiny, seemingly insignificant small things. Musashi insists you absolutely must pay close attention to trifles. People arrogantly think, oh, I am strictly a big picture visionary. I simply don't worry about the tiny details. Musashi would sternly say that is exactly where the structural rot begins.
The practical fix is to deeply respect the tiny detail. The small perfectly supports the large. The tiny nail holds the wooden board holds the massive wall.
The third mistake, style over substance, vainly choosing the flower over the nut.
We talked extensively about this, the useless decoration.
The direct fix is to fiercely focus on the pure cut, not the theatrical flourish. Constantly ask yourself, is this actually adding deep structural value, or is this just pure vanity? Rigorously apply the rule. Do absolutely nothing of no use.
The fourth mistake, Stubbornly relying on favorite tools.
I only ever work on this specific software. I only ever write in this one specific coffee shop. I only work comfortably with these exact people. That is a massive, glaring weakness.
The practical fix is to completely abandon that emotional fondness, ruthlessly adapt to the actual terrain, be totally ready and able to fight effectively with the short sword if you suddenly have to.
And the fifth mistake, impatience. Constantly seeking the fast, easy way.
We all desperately want the ultimate hack. We intensely crave the secret shortcut.
Musashi firmly says it is a grueling path of a massive distance. You must walk it patiently, step by careful step. The fix is to deeply understand that the inner spirit must not constantly fluctuate. Whether you're just starting or nearing the end, you just calmly keep walking.
It is genuinely a massive amount of dense material to take in, but is so incredibly grounding. Let's do a fast recap of the absolute core principles of the Earth Scroll. We have carefully distilled this massive text down to these essential points.
Let's flow right through them. First, always remember that the Earth is the foundational terrain and the core doctrine. The deep foundation absolutely comes first. You simply cannot securely build without it.
Next, actively adopt the master carpenter's mindset. Deeply respect pure structural integrity and always put the exact right materials in the exact right places.
Then precisely define good with truly radical honesty. Allow absolutely no hidden warping in your daily work or your personal character.
Next, remember that calm, steady repetition utterly conquers frantic intensity. Constantly aim to thoroughly make the incredibly difficult feel totally ordinary through steady, daily practice.
Then pragmatically use absolutely all available weaponry. Do not ever rigidly limit your valuable resources or your tools simply based on emotional preference or foolish pride.
Next, relentlessly keep the internal mind perfectly centered. Be neither overly tense nor dangerously lax. Constantly maintain your perfect internal balance.
Finally, and perhaps most importantly, do absolutely nothing which is of no use. You verify the truth through practice.
Do nothing which is of no use. Honestly, if we only took that one single line away from this entire exploration, it would fundamentally change absolutely everything.
It genuinely would. It completely clears the useless clutter. It brilliantly reveals the pristine, straight road.
So we have carefully built the unshakable foundation. We thoroughly understand the earth. We are standing completely firm, but just statically standing still isn't truly enough to win, is it?
No, it isn't. Perfect stability is just the mandatory prerequisite for dynamic movement. Once you finally secure the solid ground, you absolutely have to intimately learn how to fluidly move across it. You have to learn how to instantly react when the chaotic situation suddenly changes. You have to intimately learn the dynamic rhythm of the actual conflict.
And that perfectly leads us right into the very next scroll. In our next session, we are going to be deeply exploring the water scroll. We will be intensely analyzing the perfect state of mind, the physical bearing, and absolute fluid adaptability.
We will practically learn how to masterfully hold the inner spirit exactly like water, effortlessly taking the exact shape of whatever container it is in, sometimes acting as a quiet, subtle trickle, and sometimes crashing down as an utterly devastating wave. Now that we are fully grounded by the earth, we are finally ready to flow.
Here's a final thought to mull over. What actually happens when the earth underneath you isn't solid dirt, but constantly shifting sand? How do you carve an unshakable foundation in a chaotic world that simply never stops moving? Perhaps Musashi carved his foundation not into the physical ground, but onto the immutable truth of his own disciplined spirit.
Thanks for being here. If you want the full series, check the playlist, and please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.